Landon has always had his issues mentally. He's someone that is not as open about it. I share everything with you guys, and I've always been very open about my struggles with depression and anxiety, and that's just me. I get a lot of comfort in talking to you guys about those kinds of things. Landon is a very quiet, secretive person, and he has had mental health issues for as long as I have known him. He suffered from anxiety and depression. He has ADHD, which he has had since he was a little boy. So his whole life he's always just kind of struggled with his emotions and just the way his brain was wired. Around the time that I got pregnant with Delilah, he kind of started falling into a depression. I don't think the two are correlated whatsoever. We tried for Delilah, she wasn't an accident, and we both came to the mutual decision that we wanted another baby at that time. But there was other things going on with our lives that we didn't really talk about. Many factors just kind of contributed to the fact that his mental health just wasn't really great at the time. So he went to see a psychiatrist. It's not his first time visiting a psychiatrist. When he was younger, all throughout elementary school and middle school, he took ADHD medication. He stopped taking it in high school. He just didn't really like the way it felt. But he was starting school online, so he wanted to get back on that. And then he also decided that it would be a good idea to start on antidepressants and maybe something to help with his anxiety. So he went to the psychiatrist and kind of explained his issues he was having. You know, I'm having panic attacks, I'm depressed, and I have trouble focusing. So his doctor prescribed him ADHD medication, antidepressants, and an anti-anxiety medication. He did the right thing. You know, when you're going through something, everyone tells you, like, find help, go seek help. His intentions were so pure. He just wanted help. He just wanted to get better, and he just got worse. The anti-anxiety medication that was prescribed to him was for when he was having a panic attack. It wasn't something he took daily. He was only supposed to take it when there was no other way for him to calm down in the middle of a panic attack. But they were highly addictive, and then at the same time, the ADHD medication was kind of addictive because you take it and you have all this energy to do all the things you need to do in your day. So he'd take it and he'd clean the house and he'd be kind of manic, and when he was distracted with all these little things that he was now able to focus on, it kind of took away from his anxious and depressing thoughts. So he got into this pattern of waking up in the morning and taking his ADHD medication to wake him up, and he felt awake and ready for the day, and he got a ton of stuff done during the day and felt really good and happy and productive. But another thing about ADHD medication is it can kind of have some side effects when it starts to wear off, and you kind of come down from that high and you're just kind of depressed and sad and kind of the opposite. You have no motivation, and it just kind of really hits you hard when your medicine wears off. But then he had his anti-anxiety medication, so it was like, okay, well, I'm not feeling great, let me take this medicine to kind of calm myself down, and it makes you sleepy and drowsy, so he'd take that to relax and be able to get to sleep. Because another thing that the ADHD medication affected was being able to sleep. It makes you awake and it stays in your system for a while, so when you do finally lay down to get to bed, you're physically exhausted, your body is really tired from everything you did that day, but your brain is still going really fast. So it was kind of a lethal mixture of these two very strong, heavy drugs, both very addicting, and he just kind of fell into a hole. He needed the uppers to get up in the morning and the downers to slow down at night. And the more downers he took at night, the more uppers he needed to wake himself up. And the more uppers he took during the day, the more downers he needed to go to bed. I thought, the doctor gave that to him. Like, it can't hurt. Why would a doctor prescribe that if it was bad for him?
And he's dead. that story ends with the young man's death. Link in the description to the full video. If you haven't seen already, it has many, many millions of views. What's the moral to the story? Do you want to draw a conclusion about the effects of the drugs themselves? Do you want to draw a conclusion about the young woman's statement there at the end, as I've edited that 5-minute excerpt from the video? Do you want to draw a conclusion about the trust she put in doctors, her unquestioning deference to authority? I want to draw a question about the way we live with knowledge and uncertainty in the 21st century. A friend of a friend recently was prescribed antidepressants, and I was asked to do a little bit of research on the particular antidepressants involved, and then I ended up in a conversation with a friend of a friend of a friend, someone who's really not my friend at all, who was insisting that this drug that a doctor had recommended on the basis of just a few minutes in an interview, very brief, face-to-face conversation, that this drug was precisely the cure for all of the problems that this friend of a friend was having. So the way the reasoning works is this. She's having trouble sleeping. So therefore, this drug will help her sleep. She's lost a lot of weight. So therefore, this drug will help her gain weight because it's what the doctor ordered. This wasn't a discussion about side effects. This wasn't a discussion about the percentile rate of effectiveness, the placebo effect, natural rate of recovery versus effective. No. The problem was that everything he was imagining the drug would do was not even claimed in the documentation for the drug produced by the drug manufacturer themselves, right? So I was in a position of saying, you're imagining and ascribing to this drug what you want it to do. You're engaged in wishful thinking, right? But this isn't in any way based on the promise of what this actual drug is even supposed to. Not even the manufacturer claims that this drug will do what you want it to do. We have a whole kind of pseudoscience of labeling drugs as antidepressants, labeling drugs as antipsychotics, etc., that is not based on the chemical effects of those drugs. And to some extent, as with criticizing religion, like the critique of the religious leaders only goes so far. And at some point you have to turn and look at the followers and say, well, aren't you people responsible for your own decisions in life? When I was reading the information provided by the manufacturer, so this is not a critique, this is the manufacturer's own information. It admitted things in passing about this particular antidepressant. It admitted that there were 3 different studies that found that the drug had no benefit at all when compared to placebo. Now, of course, they were more interested in telling you about the other studies that did find some benefit, no matter how minor, that was measured. And there is this big overarching problem with publication bias that, in general, studies that find an effect other than what the manufacturer is looking for will not be published, will not be promoted, or may even be in sealed data in findings that are presented to the Food and Drug Administration but are kept secret from the general public. This is a problem in the American system of how drugs are tested and how drugs are evaluated. And partly, the American public says, fair enough, because the actual research is being paid for by the drug companies who want to market the drug. So if they do 10 different tests and 9 of them show no positive effect from the drug, but 1 does, they have the right to just, publish and promote that research. But there was an especially telling little paragraph in this advisory from the manufacturer. It seemed to me from the way it was written that some pages were intended for the patient and some for the doctor. Don't know exactly what the deal is with how these things are circulated. I just got it as a PDF directly off the internet, so perhaps these were instructions for doctors how to talk these things through. There was this one very telling paragraph where it said, well, there are a lot of confounding factors with this kind of research to establish whether or not, a drug is effective. So, can you really expect the effect of the drug to stand out, to be measurable, to show up empirically, compared to all these confounding factors? I'm sitting there reading this, and I can't help thinking, if you have a headache, the effect of aspirin is very, very subtle. On 2 different days, on one day, if you have a headache, you take aspirin and you lie down, and then you feel better 30 minutes later. You may attribute that effect to the aspirin. And on another day, you have a very similar headache, and you decide to just lie down and wait 30 minutes without taking the aspirin. You may also find that you feel better, right? So in your own life, if you just reflect on the effects of something like aspirin and how difficult it might be to really empirically, etiologically pin down exactly how effective is aspirin. It's an interesting challenge. But these drugs we're talking about, multi-billion-dollar marketing success story, they are in the position of saying that they can't even prove how efficacious they are. Their positive effects remain more dubious, more difficult to prove than the very subtle medical benefit of something like aspirin in treating headaches. So, wishful thinking, it's dangerous. It's more dangerous than people could possibly imagine. You can tell yourself a very simple story, a very reassuring lie, like, oh, if the doctor recommended this for me, it can't possibly harm me. You can tell yourself a lie that, oh, well, this is my problem, and this is what the doctor recommended. Therefore, the effects of this drug must be the opposite of my problem. They must counteract my symptoms. They must have an effect that's very much, corresponding to what I explained to the doctor, my problem. No. If you go and you read the label, if you read the warning from the manufacturer, in this case, the expectation was that the drug would provide a calming effect, resulting in more sleep. And the label is warning you that side effects include mania. Right? Now, the critique of the drug, particular antidepressant in this case, not on the label, is that the reason why it causes mania in some patients is that part of its effect is of a stimulant effect, not so different from methamphetamines, and that then the withdrawal, when you quit the drug, also has these very negative effects, in some ways comparable to methamphetamine. Antidepressants are very different from methamphetamines, but this is an attempt of a medical doctor to talk through what the disadvantages of taking the drug are. There's an alternative. There's an alternative to believing what people tell you, and there's an alternative to, in this way, engaging in wishful thinking and making up stories yourself. It seems to be the hardest thing for people to really admit to themselves, I don't know, And if you're sitting there, looking at that drug in a bottle, if you've been handed a prescription by a doctor, and, again, that may be on the basis of the doctor having a 5-minute conversation or a 2-minute conversation. I have a story, I guess I won't say who this is, but whatever. I have a story from a friend who threw a tantrum in a doctor's office because some test results for a physically real condition came back and didn't show anything one or the other. And the doctor, without discussing it at all, just, a friend of mine freaked out, like, oh, well, I didn't get, the test results don't tell me anything wrong with it. And the doctor, without any discussion, just took out a prescription pad and wrote, Prozac, wrote antidepressant prescription and handed it over. No discussion of what your problem is, or what the solution is, what your problem. No, like, oh yeah, here's your consolation prize. Sorry, your symptoms don't work. These things are prescribed. They are handed out with no firm basis, with no diagnostic criteria. But whatever the story, however it is you've arrived at this, situation where you're sitting there with this prescription in your hand or with the drug in your hand, it seems to me that you have to start with the humbling realization, I don't know. And the wonderful thing in the 21st century is you don't even need to go to a library to find out. There's a lot of research. There are a lot of hard facts that are presented even by the manufacturers of these drugs themselves, even by the Food and Drug Administration, by the American government, probably whatever country you're in, but the government. you really can know, and then whatever decision you make, you just count the number of hours. Like maybe it's going to be 6 hours you put into researching this drug before you feel, you got to recognize your medical doctor didn't have 6 hours. Your medical doctor didn't have 6 hours to look into this. And think about how many drugs he deals with in his profession and how many different patients. It's not an excuse, but the fact of the matter is the doctor can't look into every drug in his life for 6 hours, but you can look into every drug in your life for 6 hours, for 12 hours, for whatever it takes. You can take responsibility, for your own health to that extent. And as I say, all of that begins with having the humility to admit to yourself that you just don't know, and maybe feeling scared, maybe feeling afraid, and then responding to that fear in a really constructive way. As with the young man whose story was told at the beginning of this video, in this case, the difference between ignorance and having a well-informed opinion could be the difference between death and life.